Hello, everyone. So, if you've ever listened to any music I've made, you could probably point out similarities to Cryptopsy. And I would be lying if I were to say that they weren't a big influence of mine in the late 90s. I started to identify with that kind of sense of melody where it was dissonant, but at the same time melodic, and still there was an emphasis on bewildering the listener with kind of confusing passages and a lot of tempo shifts, but still there was a momentum there. The band is notoriously bad at songwriting, but the way the riffs were constructed, that definitely rubbed off on me. But what I wanted to talk about today was the perception of Flo Monnier, the drummer. What I did notice growing up is that the people that I talked to regarding whether or not they liked what he was doing behind the kit, the answers varied greatly depending on the kind of musician I was talking to. As a musician myself, I would often talk. You're not going to talk about Flo Monnier with non-musicians. Chances are you're going to start up a conversation and talk about his speed, his dexterity, how complex he is, and his creativity. And the layman is not going to care about any of that shit, but someone that constructs music or is in a band setting most likely will. But what I did notice is that myself and other guitar players in extreme metal, we all loved what Flo did behind the kit. And drummers did not like what he did. And I found this really interesting because I can't listen to a Cryptopsy record, at least any of the good ones, without focusing on the drums and acknowledging that what he's doing is both fitting of the mood of the parts, not necessarily the structure. The structure is a nightmare, but also very creative. And that's not easy to do with a percussive instrument. If you're trying to maintain rhythm, chances are there's only a few things you can do where it'll be appropriate for the beat of the riff and still carry the song while allowing your individuality as a player to come through. I thought that Flo was one of the most successful musicians to do that in drumming, in extreme metal drumming. And I mean, if you listen to even back like the first song on the first record, Defenestration, just that statement he makes with that blast beat that at the time was, kind of the fastest you can be, and it's surprising to me that drummers still didn't really align themselves with his playing style. And when I would ask them why, they would always be referencing that, he speeds up during blasts, or he has inconsistencies, or they don't like the kinds of beats that he plays. And if I talk to guitar players, they'd always be like, he's the most creative. He adds so much to the parts. He brings a new character to the death metal formula that they can't find in other drummers. And it was alarming to me, that kind of disconnect being present. If you ask most of the extreme metal fans that are drummers that I know, they would say they prefer vastly John Longstreth. He's pretty much the champion of the extreme metal, the drummers that I know, and I totally get that. I mean, the man's a machine. And aside from popularizing the one-handed roll in metal, he didn't really come across to me as a very creative drummer. He fits the part very well, and obviously anything he does is going to have this kind of insanely inhuman dynamic that not many people are going to be able to process, let alone play even if they're at the upper echelon of being a drummer. And there's different perspectives with that. Whereas both Flo and John Longstreth, the drumming abilities of both are just through the roof. Just speaking of straight ability, those guys can't be touched, but they're also very different, which I enjoy. But I was always alarmed by how the fact that guitar players like me love to hear what Flo is doing. I still respect John Longstreth, but I'm never going to say he is the most creative drummer behind the kit, and he's changing the riff dynamic to make it sound like the band is different from other bands. Whereas Cryptopsy definitely does that. And I think that that's because the perspective that you gain by learning an instrument mastering an instrument or being a music fan and whatever your focus is within music, if you're like, I like to hear vocals in music, I like to hear guitar in music, I like to hear drums in music, if that is your focus, you're coloring your perception to the point where it is going to be very difficult to understand objective traits within the style. And regardless of whether or not I like what Flo is doing, the unique character that he brought to the table in how he made certain riffs come to life with beats that you had not heard in extreme metal, that still didn't turn its back on what metal is. Things that he would do within a blast beat where the accent would be in a totally unorthodox spot, but it would lend itself to the character of the riff. It would drive the song forward. Or you could be the type that wants the aspect of percussion to resemble battery, and it has to be machine-like. I understand that perspective too, and if that's what you're going for, if what impresses you most is the stamina behind the kit and to be a machine that will be able to blast straight through from start to finish, I totally get that perspective as well. But I just found it very interesting that depending on what your focus is, if you're a guitar player, if you're a guitar listener, you're going to have more of a mind for the creative aspects, most likely, because as someone that tries to construct songs with a melody-based instrument, you have a lot more of a playing field for creativity. You could bring a lot more to the table and have much more of an opportunity to lend your own sense of individuality to the instrument that you're playing. Whereas, with drums, yeah, obviously that is there, but it's not going to be the focus. You're not going to be the focus of the band, most likely, and if you are, the chances of you sounding unique while doing so are pretty slim. So I think that when I think about that, when I think about what Perspective has done with how you can analyze both Flo Monnier or John Longstreth or any drummer or any musician, it makes me question the values, the inherent values of creativity in general, of whether or not there is this kind of black hole that subjectivity provides. It kind of takes me down a dark road where I really want to be able to say, this person has these traits that make them uniquely better in a way that this band has more of an artistic standpoint than this other band. But if the perspective of the other person listening doesn't understand those attributes or doesn't think that there is value in those attributes, it's very difficult to make that argument. And I find that in the comment sections of all these videos, because people still argue for subjectivity, and I totally understand that. I think subjectivity in general is a cop-out to avoid any kind of accountability, but when you look at songwriting in general, there is an objective way to showcase strength. There is objectively good songwriting, objectively bad songwriting. If you can string a cohesive thought together, you have a much more objectively good structure than, say, what Chuck Schuldiner does in like the last video I showed you guys. But back to the subject at hand, Perspective, and how it has made people color their thoughts on musicians who they admire or don't admire, or how they process the info that is present in the performances of those musicians. I really do think that in order to fully understand the level that a player is approaching you at, it's both a blessing and a curse to have musical knowledge. I would love to be able to have a clean slate and be able to digest what Flo and what John Longstreth bring to the table and come up with a logical argument based on the clean slate that I'd be coming from, but I don't have that anymore. And the musicians I grew up with talking about these players with, they don't have that. And it's an impossibility. And I do enjoy the fact that I understand how music works on a superficial level. I understand how the instrumentation of a death metal band works. And I love that I know that, but at the same time I really miss those days when I didn't understand it and every experience was new and I wasn't able to critique anything yet because I wasn't familiar with the strengths of that genre and the weaknesses. But I do think that either you can either process the attributes of these kind of players best by either having a full scope of the knowledge of all of the instrumentation that goes into a metal band or none at all. I think that if you master just guitar or just drums, you're coming at music from different perspectives in that kind of mindset. So you're going to have this bias whether you're coming from a more creatively focused instrument like guitar or a more backbone of the band percussive instrument like drums. So there's different philosophies, and I totally understand analyzing the players accordingly. But it seems that in general, based on my experience talking with others, Flo Monnier is a guitar player's drummer. John Longstreth is a drummer's drummer. And I do like that we all love a genre where that can be possible. And it shows that there is realms of creativity that you can approach that are going to be new if we decide to keep the spirit of metal alive in what we are trying to achieve. And that is exciting. That is exciting to me that both these two players came into their strengths fairly recently, and we can have a discussion about this. I like knowing that we can take this further. But that being said, I do think that the perspective I have, as much as I love it, as much as I love where I'm at in terms of how I'm able to digest metal right now, is both a curse and a blessing, because I do wish that I can come at it from a clean slate. I wish I could have a look at the idea of what percussion can do in a song format without deciding beforehand how it needs to fill out a song, how it needs to make a riff work, how it needs to make an arrangement work. These would all be very good things to come at with a clean slate, but that's an impossibility. So that's all I wanted to talk about that. Thank you for listening.